Ms Legalista here. Welcome to the video. If you're going to catch it later, welcome to the live. If you are in the middle of your day and you decided to join me, again, Ms Legalista here. Thank you for joining. I want to talk about these doctors, the victims, especially in this case. Now, usually we think of this as trip and fall fraud, insurance fraud, but this has gone to a whole new level in terms of targeting poor people to try to get them to, yes, some of these were trip and fall cases to say that they tripped and fell when they didn't. But in other cases, getting people to actually have surgery done on them, surgery. And in some instances, not once, but twice, telling people they needed to have two surgeries in order to get paid. But I want to open this up. And look, this is coming out of the Southern District of New York. And so many of these cases come out of New York. There are a couple of things you could feel about this, right? You could say, well, if I go to New York, I'm not even going to sneeze because the U.S. attorney there, Damian Williams, is going to come after me. I'm going to sneeze, and there he is going to be right there to let me know whether or not I've broken any federal laws. But the other thing that makes you wonder is, oh my gosh, is all of this stuff really happening in New York? But there's a reason for that. A lot of companies are located there. The population is much higher. So yes, you're going to have a lot of publicity around some of these crimes because they're going to be so large and they're going to impact so many people. So I'm not going to put down New York, but it's like how many US federal attorneys do you know by name? Okay. So yeah, Damian Williams coming out of the Southern District of New York is one of those. But let me pull this up so that we can take a look at what was actually going on in this case. Because, like I said before, targeting poor people. And one of the things that they said was, let me see if I can bring this up. I'm really slow this morning. Well, actually, it's afternoon, and I forgot to open this up so that it would already be here. And I'm going to go to this part where they actually talk about the people, because I think that's what we forget about sometimes, is the actual people who are harmed in this. And there's this part right here. And this is the part that I'm highlighting right here. All right, look at this. It says the fraud scheme participants recruited individuals, the patients, to stage or falsely claim to have suffered trip and fall accidents. Now, remember, I said this is not just trip and fall, it's a whole lot more than that. It says in the course of the fraud scheme participants recruited more than 400 patients, more than 400. It said it was common. It says, first of all, they were extremely poor as patients. It was common for patients to ask for food when they would appear for their intake meeting with the lawyers. I mean, and there were lawyers that were in on this too, okay? Ask for food. Many of the patients did not have sufficient clothing to keep them warm during the wintertime and had poor quality shoes. Members of the fraud scheme also recruited patients who were drug addicts, and it was common for scheme participants to recruit patients from homeless shelters in New York City. So they went after the people who were the neediest, the people who were the most down on their luck, the people who were experiencing the most challenging times in their lives. And those were the people that they chose to go after. And I'm just going to go ahead and let you know, for instance, one of the doctors here got 3 years and restitution 3.8 million. So you tell me if you think that's enough. If you think 400 patients and the kind of targeting that went on in this case, you let me know if you think that 3 years is enough, because I don't know. I think maybe I feel some kind of way about that. But let me head back over to the actual document because I want to go over to the indictment so that we can see how all of this happened, how all of this got laid out, and how the U.S. attorneys put these things together. Now, many of us have been in situations where we've been in accidents and we have had, let me get this right, we've had we've had injuries, we've had maybe personal property that has gotten damaged. And so, yes, we had to file a claim. We had to follow the insurance process in order to get our recovery. And that's why you pay insurance, right? You pay premiums so that when something happens, you're covered. We had our shed blow up last year. Don't ask me what happened with that because I don't know. I wasn't out there. I went out there and the thing was in flames 20 feet high. I don't know. And there was my husband with a water hose. But we pay insurance so that, yes, we get a new shed. And now we have a new shed. But in this case, this was something entirely different in terms of how they were targeting the poorest people, like I said, people who were in homeless shelters, people who barely had shoes on their feet, clothes on their back. And yet that's who they decided they were going to go after because they knew that those people were the neediest people and that those people, that $1,000, I'll take that $1,000, I'll take that $1,500 because I need it so badly. And you had one woman, I'm going to talk about one lady who woke up. They said she had almost died during the surgery. She had almost died. But let's look at this and see exactly what went on in this case. Like I said, coming out of the Southern District of New York, so many of these cases, mail fraud, wire fraud. Yes. So in or about 2015, and these are the people up here. These are the defendants: George Constantine, Mark Elephant, Andrew Dowd, Sadie. I think the name was Sydney, but it goes by Sadie Ribeiro, and Adrian Alexander. And remember I said they said they were defrauding businesses and insurance companies by staging trip and fall accidents and filing fraudulent lawsuits. And like I said, this is bigger than trip and fall. This is not the trip and fall you're used to seeing. In or about 2015, certain members of the fraud scheme split from the original conspiracy. So it wasn't enough to have just this original conspiracy. They formed a whole separate conspiracy that operated in substantially the same manner. So first we had these staged accidents. It says fraud scheme participants recruited individuals, the patients, to stage or falsely claim to have suffered trip and fall accidents at particular locations throughout New York City area. These are called the accident sites. Like they went through, found spots that looked like they had things going on. Like this would be a good spot and that would be a good spot. Yes. In the course of the fraud scheme participants recruited more than 400 patients. In the beginning of the fraud scheme participants would instruct patients to claim they had tripped and fell at a particular location when in fact patients had suffered no such accident. Eventually, at the direction of the lawyers, listen to that, at the direction of the lawyers who filed fraudulent lawsuits on behalf of the patients, scheme participants began to instruct patients to stage trip and fall accidents, go to a location and deliberately fall. These people, like if they did a really good job, and I'm not trying to be funny here, but it takes some finesse to be able to pull off a fall because there are video cameras everywhere now. People are out recording everywhere, and you could easily be picked up by one of these cameras to show that you didn't get your fall right. Your fall looked that there was something wrong with the look, but here you go. They went to these locations and deliberately fell. The reason for this change was to ensure that the patients would be transported to the hospital via ambulance and obtain ambulance reports. So no longer is it, it's not enough anymore to say you just had a fall. Now you actually have to deliberately fall. So again, they're upping the standard. We're going to find that this goes on. This is how this continues and grows. So thereby making their fake accidents appear more legitimate. Common accident sites used during the fraud scheme included cellar doors, cracks in concrete sidewalks, and purported potholes. You guys, do you know how many times I have fallen on the sidewalk? I had the fire truck that's on the same street where I fell, the firehouse. They were driving by in the fire truck and they saw me fall and they stopped and cleaned up my bruises and everything. It was a little embarrassing there. Okay, filing fraudulent lawsuits. After the patients staged their trip and fall accidents, or falsely claimed to have suffered such accidents. Members of the fraud scheme referred the patients to one of several lawyers. So they've got these lawyers. These are their go-to lawyers who are going to help them get these, this fake, this whole fake thing, get their insurance money, included, and then you see the names there, including George Constantine and Mark Elephant, the defendants. The lawyers commenced personal injury lawsuits against the property owners of the accident sites and or the property owners' insurers, collectively called the victims. The fraudulent lawsuits did not disclose that the patients had either deliberately fallen or never fallen at the accident sites. Instead, the fraudulent lawsuits claimed that patients' injuries resulted from the falls were solely caused by the negligence of the owners of the accident sites. Scheme participants instructed the patients to claim that they had sustained injuries to particular areas of their bodies. Okay, so look, at this point, they've figured out, okay, here's where we need for people to say they got hurt. Like they have a whole system here in place. Think about this now. They know the people that they're targeting. They've got a certain group they're going after. They have certain kinds of accident sites that they're looking for. And now they're saying, make sure you fall. We want a deliberate fall so you can be picked up in the ambulance. And here are the places on your body that we need you to point it out. They've got a whole SOP. This is their standard operating procedure of how they are going to conduct this insurance fraud. So the body parts, if injured, okay, reaped higher rewards. So they said including the knees, shoulders, and or back. It says these reaped higher damage awards in personal injury lawsuits. George Constantine, the defendant, was one of the primary lawyers who filed fraudulent lawsuits during the course of the fraud scheme. As noted above, in or around 2015, certain members of the scheme, including Sadie Ribeiro and Andrew Dowd, the defendants, joined in a separate conspiracy that operated in substantially the same way as the original conspiracy. The primary lawyer who filed fraudulent lawsuits during the course of the second conspiracy was Mark Elephant, the defendant. In total, Constantine and Elephant filed hundreds of fraudulent lawsuits. And so here's the thing. Because we know, if you're talking about the ambulance picking you up and you going in and having surgery and all of this, that's a lot of money that somebody is going to receive. Okay, let's get into that. Let's talk about this medical treatment. Members of the fraud scheme referred the patients to particular MRI facilities, including an MRI facility owned by Adrian Alexander, the defendant, as well as to certain doctors, including Andrew Dowd and Sadie Ribeiro, the defendants. These doctors almost invariably recommended that the patients undergo surgery, irrespective of medical need. Now, part of me sort of wonders to some extent, how do you get to the point where you even have these conversations about, hey, let's go all in on a conspiracy. Let's go all in on some insurance fraud. Like, who does that? Who is thinking that that's the thing to do? Well, apparently these guys did. And so now they're telling people, hey, we need you to have surgery. Come in and have surgery. Regardless of whether or not you need it, that's what we need you to do. In order to obtain MRI referrals and to substantiate their fraudulent lawsuits, the patients were instructed to receive ongoing treatment from a chiropractor. Okay, so adding another level there. We've got the ambulance, we've got the doctors, we've got the surgery, and now we want you to keep coming back for treatment. Again, all of this is about running up the tab. This is about running up the medical bill. In addition, fraud scheme participants encouraged patients to attend physical therapy sessions in order to create the appearance of serious bodily injury. In a March 2015 email, one of the scheme organizers explained to Adrian Alexander, the defendant, whose litigation funding company funded medical treatment for many of the patients, that having patients attend physical therapy sessions was necessary when it comes to painting a picture of the client being hurt. So if you know the rules of the game, and the rules of the game say, okay, so it looks better if you have them picked up in an ambulance because That means that they're probably substantially hurt. And then you got a chiropractor taking care of them, and it's certain body parts, remember? And now keep coming back for physical therapy. Keep coming back for it paints that sort of picture we're looking for. The patients were informed that if they intended to continue with their fraudulent lawsuits, they would need to undergo surgeries to increase the value of the fraudulent lawsuits. Imagine being so desperately in need of money that you agree to this. And some of these people were so poor, it's the medical procedures included disectomies, spinal fusions, in case you didn't hear me say that the first 4 times, knee and shoulder surgeries, and non-surgical epidural injections in your back. Yeah. At least one patient who underwent a surgery as part of the fraud scheme was told after awaking from general anesthesia that she almost died during the surgery. As an incentive to submit to these surgeries, the defendants and their co-conspirators usually arranged for payments in the form of loans to be made to the patients each time they had surgery, typically between $1,000 and $1,500 per surgery. These were called post-surgery payments. Patients generally were told to undergo 2 surgeries. So now it's not enough to tell them to fall and get hurt. It's not enough to tell them, hey, I want you to, point out certain body parts and keep going back for physical therapy. Now I need you to have not just 1 surgery, but I need you to come in and have 2 surgeries. Hey, poor person, can you come over here and have 2 surgeries? Because, I'm an attorney and I'm a doctor and we're doing this fraud here and we're trying to make us a whole bunch of money. But I need you to undergo surgeries so that I can just be richer. Like, what are you doing here? What in the world is going on? Who thinks this stuff up? I just do not understand. Doctors in the fraud scheme, including Andrew Dowd and Sadie Rubiero, and I'm probably saying that name wrong, the defendants were expected to, and in fact did, conduct these surgeries regardless of the legitimate medical needs of the patients. For example, in a March 2016 email before Dodd's shoulder examination of a particular patient who had staged a trip and fall accident, one of the scheme organizers asked Dowd to write us an additional report today stating that patient's left shoulder has worsened so that I can book this surgery for you. Dowd provided the requested report and recommended that patient to undergo arthroscopic surgery. Imagine just being in that situation, that this is what you would let somebody operate on your left shoulder to get some money. In an August 2015 email from Ribeiro to Alexander, in which Ribeiro described the services that he performed, Ribeiro wrote, "I will play very honest game with you." So first of all, who puts that in writing? Like, these are people who, what? Did they think they weren't going to get caught? Eh, eh, I mean, you're doing this over 400 times. You've gotten over 400 people to do this. And at some point in time, you don't think somebody's going to question what's going on? All of these trip and falls happening in the same location, and you don't think anybody's going to notice? You don't think insurers have, relationships and talk to each other about what's going on? So who puts this in writing? I will play very honest game with you. I see the patient and I generate a very good dictation that justifies the treatment. There is a cost for that, and I hope a profit. Really, really, this is kind of where we are with this one. Members of the fraud scheme often recruited individuals who were extremely poor as patients. Notice what they put in this indictment was not poor. They said extremely poor. It's one thing to be in a challenging financial situation, but this sounds like people who were destitute and feeling like they did not have very many options left. It says individuals desperate enough to submit to surgeries in exchange for the small post-surgery payments. What did I say? $1,000, $1,500. For example, it was common for patients to ask for food when they would appear for their intake meetings with the lawyers. I mean, if you're the attorney, how do you, like, where is your conscience? Like, how do you do this to somebody knowing that they're hungry? I mean, not hungry for learning or hungry to get a job or hungry to go out into the world, but like literally physically hungry inside. It says many of the patients did not have sufficient clothing to keep them warm during the wintertime and had poor quality shoes. Members of the fraud scheme also recruited patients who were drug addicts. Okay. It was also common for scheme participants to recruit patients from homeless shelters in New York City. Like I said before, they went after the neediest people, they targeted the neediest people. Because most patients did not have the means to pay for transportation, members of the scheme transported the patients to their various medical and legal appointments. Scheme participants frequently dropped off carloads of patients at a time at these appointments. Can you imagine having a standard operating procedure that part of it includes, let me run over to the homeless shelter, pick up a bunch of people, and drop them off over here for their appointments? Like, it's like putting an assembly line piece by piece together. You've got all the pieces stacked up. You've got all the parties ready to go to do their role. And at the end, the money flows out to you. So then they used funding companies to help put all of this together. It says, as explained above, as an inducement to undergo surgeries, the patients were offered financial incentives. Oh, is that what we're calling this? Typically, $1,000 loans after they completed their surgeries. These were called the post-surgery payments, as well as a percentage of any settlement payments from their fraudulent lawsuits. As noted above, patients typically were convinced to submit to 2 surgeries to maximize the value of their fraudulent lawsuits. The patient's legal and medical fees were usually paid for by litigation funding companies, including a funding company owned by Adrian Alexander. So you have, I'm going to like do the fraud over here on this side and finance the fraud over here on this side. I guess he thought he was in a win-win situation. The defendant, okay, so we have funding company owned by Adrian Alexander, the defendant, even if the patient maintained medical coverage through an insurance company or a government subsidized program. The funding companies also paid fraud scheme, organizers and participants referral fees, typically $1,000 to $2,500 for each patient who signed a funding agreement. Like I said, a whole assembly line. They have this set up from beginning to end. In exchange for funding patients' medical and legal costs, the funding companies charge the patients high interest rates, sometimes up to 50% on medical loans and up to 100% on personal loans. Okay, so at this point, they're just getting greedy. I mean, now we already knew they were greedy, but really, the interest rates were so high that oftentimes the majority, if not all, of the proceeds that were awarded in the fraudulent lawsuits were paid to the funding companies, lawyers, doctors, and fraud scheme organizers, with the patients receiving a much smaller percentage of the remaining recovery. And think about this. What are you going to do? Because at this point, you're already in a dire situation. Now you have engaged in this fraud with all of these other people. So are you the person who is then going to file a lawsuit against them? Are you the person who's going to complain to the police? Or, are you that person? Probably not. Probably not. All right, so then we talk about harm to victims as a result of the fraud scheme. During the fraud scheme, George Constantine, Mark Elephant, Andrew Dowd, Sadie Ribeiro, and Adrian Alexander, the defendants, together with others known and unknown, attempted to defraud the victims of more than $31 million. $31 million. Look down here. Let's see. It says in total, settlements from lawsuits filed by Constantine that were referred by fraud scheme participants exceeded 20 million, and Constantine collected more than 5 million in legal fees. Wow. Okay, so let's check out Andrew Dowd. This is during the course of the fraud scheme, Dowd performed hundreds of knee and shoulder surgeries on patients, earning approximately $9,500 per surgery. Now, remember, he was paying out like, here you go, you can get 1,000, 1,500, but I'm getting in the nine. So I guess that leaves him with like 8,000, right? Then we have Sadie Ribeiro, was a pain management doctor and surgeon who performed back surgeries, among other medical procedures on patients. Ribeiro paid fraud scheme participants cash kickbacks in exchange for patient referrals, and during the course of the scheme, treated nearly 200 patients. 200 patients. Remember, there are a total of over 400. At all times relevant, let's move down to Mr. Alexander here. He was the defendant. He owned one of the primary funding companies used in the fraud scheme, as well as the MRI facility that performed MRIs on many of the patients. It says Alexander encouraged scheme participants to recruit more patients, and as one of the primary backers, financial backers of the scheme, closely monitored patients' cases. It says through high compounding interest rates, Alexander's company profited from the patients' fraudulent lawsuits. Alexander told investors that his company realized annual returns in excess of 30%. I wonder if those investors asked any questions at all. So then we have the statutory allegations here. Yes, we know, defrauded, used the post office, used the mail, conspired together. So mail fraud is one of the allegations that was against them. Wire fraud was another. Then you have the conspiracy to commit mail and fraud there together. And then I think the last one is mail fraud. I think that's it for I missed another one. The wire fraud there. So here's the thing, what's the government asking for? The government's like, you're going to forfeit all this, the money, anything you bought with the money, anything you made off the stuff that you bought with the money, all of it. The government said, we want it all. Anything that can be, look at this right here. Here's the language that you want to see. Traceable to the commission of the offenses. Traceable, proceeds traceable to the commission of the said offenses. Meaning if we can trace it back to any of that coming out of this whole scheme, it is ours. It is ours. You will have to give it all up. And then here, let me slide down. Even if they can't, here's the thing. And if they can't find it, it said if any of the above described forfeitable property as a result of any act or omission of the defendant cannot be located, has been transferred or sold or deposited with a third person, has been placed beyond the jurisdiction of the court, has been substantially diminished in value, or has been commingled with other property in such a way that it cannot be divided, they're seeking forfeiture of that. Look, they said to seek forfeiture of any other property of the defendants. They're going after it all. Going after it all. So let me tell you where this stands now. So this is wrapped up and I want to talk about Ribeiro. This is sort of wrapped up for him and where things stand with him now. 3 years. 3 years. And in his case, remember, it was like 200 patients. So 3 years plus 3.8 million restitution. 3.8 million restitution. So you let me know if you think all of that makes sense. But yes, this whole scheme was set up to go after poor people in New York, people who were having substance abuse issues, people who were in homeless shelters, the really poor, people who needed food. Remember, people who showed up at the attorney's office asking for food. Can you have some food? Do you have some food that I can eat? And yet you're the attorney who's going to put them on this path now to engage in these trip and falls, to engage in this insurance fraud, to have to go through multiple office visits with a chiropractor, with a physical therapist, and then say, hey, can you have a surgery or two? Because we need that too. Everything to make our case look good. And then we're going to send these emails that are just ridiculous and that just show the guilt and show that this is a scheme. We're going to do all of that. But if that gets you a little bit more informed, if you know people who are facing challenging situations, tell them, no, don't do this. Don't do this. We will find another way. Do not do this. Yes. So don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if this gives you a little bit more information about what's going on now in the insurance fraud world, not just your regular trip and fall anymore. Like I said, there's a whole standard operating procedure for how this is working. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Mwah. Peace.